Walk with me through the cellar door.
A storm is coming, Francis.
A portal to a more skeptical world.
Cellar Door Skeptics begins right now. Prepare for the revolution with your hosts, Christopher Tanner and Chris Hanna.
Welcome to another episode of Cellar Door Skeptics. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight.
We're starting the episode with me not seeing any John Wicks because nobody tells me when the episode starts, so we just rant.
We do. Welcome to episode 174. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Tonight we have some amazing topics for you. A little bit more on the political side to begin with, but I thought it would be fun. You know, we had an article where we get to talk about will non-believers swing the 2020 elections. I think that's a good discussion. Also, there was a local article in a paper in Holland, Michigan, which is right down the road from me, where they talked about what is socialism and what types of socialism is there, and are we mislabeling ourselves as Democratic Socialists? And then we also will. There's a discussion about whether prepackaged food is better than stores. What is the larger carbon footprint? But before we get into any of those topics, I thought a good conversation would be about Game of Thrones and Infinity Wars, only because Hannah never watches either of them, and he was complaining. As the show started, about me giving spoilers about the new Avengers movie, which I accidentally gave to somebody today because he sounded like he knew what was going on in the plot. So I was like, "Oh yeah, that happened." He's like, "I don't remember that," and I was like, "Oh yeah, well, all right. You were talking about the last movie. Well, that didn't happen in the last movie. That happened in the new movie. How did you know about that?" He's like, "Oh, I don't know. I saw a trailer or something." Oh, okay. Anyway.
Yeah, for me, the extent of what I know is basically what was given in the last major trailer. The first hour is kind of somber. Second hour is it's kind of working through a lot of difficulties. The third hour is the big culmination of energy and excitement, according to Pop Culture Happy Hour podcast. They did a nice job saying it's great. A lot of the things that people didn't like about the movie, where a 3-hour movie, they're expecting it to be kind of deadened by the energy when it comes to the the big fights of that always happen in these kinds of movies, because that does happen. Like in Civil War, people were like, "Oh my god, this is just too much." Like some people were complaining that like the fighting actually slowed things down in certain cases, or one that gets too crazy and big. So like I'm happy to hear that is basically not true for this movie, and for Game of Thrones. Apparently it's the most recent battle. The biggest thing people were complaining about was that it was too dark, which I find absolutely hilarious because that probably means that people don't know how to adjust their television sets for the light that they live under. You need to adjust the light in your room for the proper amount of light so that you can see everything. But I mean, did you have any issues with that? Because that's what Dave Teach was talking about too.
Oh, I did. It was awful. I mean, and I'll be honest.
It was that dark you couldn't see?
Yeah, like you're like, what's that weird black cloud that looks like it's not resonating? The problem I have is that I was watching it on my Switch. I have Hulu on my Switch, so I was watching Hulu on the Switch, and I was like,
the biggest battle in the history of Game of Thrones on your tiny...
No. I was watching it on the big TV. My Switch was hooked up to my TV. But the problem could have been because, the Switch doesn't run 4K. My PlayStation does. My TV is not a 4K TV, though, And so the problem is that I didn't know if it was a resolution thing. I did actually. I turned the blackness down and I turned the brightness up, and it got better, but it wasn't super clear. The problem is I don't think I don't think the megahertz on my TV run fast enough for it because
my TV's like 120.
What's that?
Is your TV a 120 or 60? No, I'm guessing it's a few years old, so it'll be the 60 or 120 because the new ones are like 240.
Yeah, my TV's easy. 6 years old, easy.
Okay, yeah, you're at 60 probably then.
Yes,
so that's what my TV is too, and it's not that crazy because that's refresh rate in the megahertz. But I mean, for most people, you're not really going to notice too much. But apparently that was something that really pissed a lot of people off.
I know my boss was telling me this morning. He's like, "Yeah, I don't know what people are complaining about it," and I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, what type of TV do you have?" And he's like, "Well, I don't know. I think I got this LG QE something." I don't know, it's like a 65-inch TV. I was like, well, how much did you pay for that? He's like, I don't know, it was like $2 or $3 grand. I'm like, well, no wonder.
Yeah.
Like, Dave, you have a top end TV. People aren't,
my old man's got a Sony Bravos 4K. When I walk in that thing, I feel like I put my head inside of it. It's so clear. It's crazy.
Yeah, and so I understand. I mean, the wife and I complained a little bit, and then it's like, just deal with it. It is what it is. It's not like we're not going to watch this again. So let's watch it now.
This isn't like network TV in 1991. Like, you'll be able to see it again when you want.
Yeah, and we've fought not getting a new TV. In fairness, I mean, like I used to try and buy a TV when the new latest and greatest thing came out. I used to try and get a TV every 2 years. I had a plasma for a long time, and then I wanted a new one. I bought a high-end plasma, and then plasmas kind of went out of style, and I got an LCD. And then, I wanted another one, and then my father-in-law gifted me this LG, which wasn't like top end, but I mean, for the time, it was a really, really nice TV. Now, we're at the edge where the problem is technology's gone faster than TV, but my TV still works. So I really don't want to replace it because it's kind of like, it still works. It's just not as cool.
It's Moore's Law. What you got some kids that are coming up. And so when you decide to get a new TV, like, that can be repurposed for another human.
That's true. You're right. If one of my kids go to college or move out, I can be like, you need a TV?
I'm not buying you one. You can have this one.
Yep, I got you.
Whatever. Yeah. Or you could turn that TV into the podcast room TV when you finish your basement.
That's true.
That
is true.
Because what I did, I bought my house and they had two options. They were like, for $850, big crazy sale, you can get the smart TV, or you can get the 3D TV. And me, with my infinite wisdom and complete and total 2020 perfect future vision of what the future is going to entail, I got the 3D TV, and I have absolutely no use for these goddamn
Hold on. I got to ask you a question. Do you have glasses? How many glasses do you have?
I have 2 sets of glasses, and they're awesome.
So just two glasses or 4? How many glasses physically do you have? 2?
Well, I have two glasses. I call them pairs of glasses, like one pair of eyeballs. But either way, I have 2 glasses.
Would you be opposed to a friend of mine coming over and just watching Tron 3D on your TV? Because we both have Tron 3D, and neither one of us have a 3D TV, and we're too cheap to ever buy a 3D TV. But
as long as the PS3 firmware can handle it, otherwise,
I'll just bring my PS4 over. It'll be fine. I'll bring that or my 4K player over. But,
so welcome to Solid Our Skeptics, everyone, where we have mandates planning happening here. No, I don't. We could figure something out to check it out. It's cool, dude. I used to play Assassin's Creed with a PS3, and like everything it formats even things that weren't made for 3D into 3D. And it does a pretty cool job. The TV, it's just super cool, but the problem is you have to sit about 4 feet back from the TV, maybe 5, and you got to be right in the dead center. So let's say you have a nice room. That means you got to put a stupid chair in the center of the room to play the game and actually get the 3D, because you're too far away, it's useless. You're too close, it's useless. And so like you kind of have to plan your room around that. So if you have a gaming room with that rig, that space, those TVs are super awesome. But most people don't have a room that's purposefully set up for that, because I mean, let's face it, we don't live in the Hollywood Hills where that's a theater is a thing that you have in your house.
Yeah, I don't even have enough time to do any of that. Like, I would have to give up board games to watch TV or play video games.
I saw a meme about Catan today. Did you see it on Reddit at all? No. It was trending pretty hot. There was someone who was just like, they're talking about Catan, and there's like, welcome to the game of Catan. It's a game, talking about strategy. And then it's just like, and then the most stressful moment is like when you take all of your blocks and you build this perfectly set up like building while you wait for your friend Bill to make his 19-minute decision for his turn.
Oh, that's not funny.
I don't know what any of those things are, but I imagine it was you getting like insane with like a little building that you were building with your blocks and waiting for someone to make it.
It's the opposite. I'm the guy that takes 19 minutes, and it's my son. Guy. Oh yeah, I'm that guy. I'll admit it. I'll be honest. It's honesty above all else, right, man? I'll admit I'm the guy that contemplates every single little variable scenario before I make the decision, and then I think about it a second time, like in a chess type scenario, like, okay, if I do this and then this and then this, and then I usually go to like a 4th level where like I go, okay, if I do this and this, and he does this, and they do this, and when you start adding more people in, it gets more complex.
And so
I'm that guy.
You're the person who betrays your wife and your child to win a Catan. Catan.
Yeah, I don't like losing, so yeah, I won't lie. I don't want to lose. So. But
that's cool.
I won't cheat to win, but I don't want to lose.
The TV and stuff. That's pretty fun stuff. There's been a lot of pop culture things that have been happening lately. It's been a pretty interesting spring. I really think this year is going to be an interesting one. I mean, something like $1.2 billion worth of Avengers tickets sold. So like we're potentially looking at the highest grossing movie of all time in human history. I personally think that this is going to outrun Avatar. Just because superhero movies are hitting in other places around the world, because Avatar was like the 3D thing that went all over the world because people advertised it that way. Like and apparently there's like 6 movies or something that James Cameron's made. I haven't heard anything about any of them or seen any advertisements, but like I really think the Avengers movie is going to be insane, and the Game of Thrones thing sounds like it's going to be a big deal. The ending last season, because this is the end season, right? This isn't like a first half or something like Deathly Hallows, so it's over. Do you think they're going to end it like where everybody's happy? Not so much like happy that it's like over, or like happy like this was the best ending, but like people end with like the ending of Sopranos. People were like, what? And then like Dexter, people were like, what? Like, do you think Game of Thrones is going to give everybody a satisfying ending, or they're just going to stick a sword up your ass?
I think they're going to stick the sword in the nether regions. And the only reason I say this, and I go back to this, is Stephen King, and I'm a big Stephen King fan. One is Stephen King's biggest discussion points, because people always complain, that he creates a lot of books that are very similar, right? And then they also complain that Stephen King has bad endings to some of his books. And for example, the Dark Tower series, the ending is very underwhelming. And you know what he said to that? He says, I want to tell you all something. Did you enjoy the journey? How many of you read this just so you can get to the end? Did you speed read this so you can go all the way to the end? And then you're like, oh, this is what I wanted. I'm not here to make you feel good. I'm not here to boost your ego. I'm not here to make you go, yes, I guessed this right. I'm here to give you a story, to take you on a journey. And if you enjoyed the journey you went on, the ending is to some extent nothing more than a meaningless point of going back and rereading the journey that you came from. And
was that in his book about writing? I know there's a book that he wrote.
It's a saying I heard. It's an interview he did, because he gets a lot of. In fairness, he gets a lot of flack. And I will say, I guess if you haven't read The Dark Tower by now, I'm not going to even spoiler alert this crap, for Christ's sake. But like in the Dark Tower series, at the very end, all this stuff happens, and like how he kills, the Crimson King, you're like, oh, that was stupid. Like, you literally want to go, that was the most underwhelming battle ever written in history, and you're like, I can't even believe he wrote this, And then the very end where he goes up the tower and he goes into the tower, it's very underwhelming, and it's just like, a lot of people gave him crap for that. And I'll be honest with you, the first time I read it, I threw my book. I was like, I literally just wasted 1,500 pages of this last couple books to get to here. Every other point that you made, every other part. And the problem is as a society, we want this story to go on. We want everything to continue. We don't want death. We don't want the end. We don't want something new, because we don't like that change. And that's the same thing with Game of Thrones. It's we've had this amazing epic journey, but it has to end at some point. At some point, it does have to end. Yes, could it go on? But how much entertaining would it be? I mean, for Christ's sake, we have number 5 Cheeto Monster in The Office. Everything that he does is drama. Everything he does is conflict. It's like a crappy Game of Thrones, to some extent, where nobody dies and the only nudity is his small dick. And there's been some stories and things like that I've seen that like they end in a nice way, like to the point where they close the story out like that's the end of the story. It doesn't have to be this like euphoric moment. So I think that's what people get caught up in, is like they're waiting for this like this ejaculatory, there's this orgasmic, like just lose your mind with enjoyment.
And in all reality, I think back to some of the people who ended stories the best are the people who end stories with kind of like the movies that end the stories and it's like it's over. This was a great journey, but they end it in such a way that there could be more. But instead of like ending it completely and slowly, they give or abruptly they have like like that the backstory. So like Jesus went on to be nailed to a cross, and Mary, who knows, and Joseph, I don't know what happened to that guy. You know what I mean? Like they give like those things at the end of the story and stuff. One of the better Tolkien did it, where he basically that story was over. The Lord of the Rings was done when the freaking ring was in the magma, and Smeagol was swimming with the fishes. But there's still another 100 pages to that book. So, like, I mean, each author has a different way to do it, and some people think of it, and the same with movies and books. And that's why I was curious what you thought, because, like, there's a whole bunch of really, really great visual stories for, like, HBO stuff and everything. I don't know how Game of Thrones books end, but we'll see what happens in the movies. Because, like, everybody has been saying that this Marvel 22-movie series with the current Marvel arc, and apparently this is the end of like a major thing. They're going to be starting a whole bunch of really new stuff with new characters, new things, and everybody's been saying this is a good, clean ending that makes everyone kind of feel pretty good. And so like I was just curious, without anything away, did you feel completed?
Yes, to the point. What bothered me is it's the end, right? But to the point where they sticked closer to what happens in the actual comic book series and how they ended it to some extent and how they do the same things in the comic book series. I like that. And, cool. It was, there's some points where I was like, this is dumb, and there's some plot holes in some of these things. And you just like, why did it, oh my gosh, No. So a little worse than that. But, for the most part, I cried, at the beginning, you cry, in the middle a little bit, and you cry at the end. And, and it's kind of funny because there's this business book I've been reading about how, to present meetings and different things like that. And I have to give this presentation to corporate leadership about why we need a little bit better meetings and different things like that. And they, in the book, though, they talk about how do you structure a meeting? Well, you want to structure a meeting to include conflict, to include, drama and different things. You don't want to exclude those things because those are bad for an organization who just is, a yes sir, no sir organization.
Yeah, to ignore any kind of human emotion. Yeah.
And when you look at it like that and you go, and they compared it to movies, and I took it back to the movies and the books and different things, it's amazing because if you don't have those and you don't end those arcs and create new ones, you're at some point, just regurgitating the exact same stuff that you've done. And you look at it, what's Garfield? Garfield's the exact same thing over and over and over again. Calvin and Hobbes at some point ran its course. It was the same type of thing over and over and over again. And
then he decided to end it because it was time. Yeah.
Exactly. And South Park can't seem to die. Simpsons don't seem to die.
Because it's got so much money.
Exactly.
So much money.
And the only nice thing about Rick and Morty is that they've had, 6 years, 7 years, and only 3 seasons, with only 30 episodes. And the nice thing is that Avengers brings everything to this close. They wrap up a bunch of different story, arcs. They explain it in a very logical way. And you kind of get to see people get their just desserts, which was satisfying for me,
I'm curious to see what direction they go and everything. So I don't know. I think it'll be a cool time. Once I get a chance to check it out, maybe we can talk about it. But in the end, it'll probably, just be one of those things that just, our culture will make this, a moment for. I would like to see this as a point of our culture, of American culture, kind of moving on a little bit from the superhero stuff. That's just my personal opinion. I don't know. I've been kind of overwhelmed with a lot of that, but I do think that it's nice to see like this could be the last of the monoculture, right? People always talk about like our entire country kind of sort of getting behind something aside from political events or terror attacks or something where everybody in the country can get along. Like there's a lot of people in this country that are like, yeah, I'm gonna go check out that Avengers movie. Like those moments are few and far between nowadays. Like it used to be like the end of MASH, the whole freaking country would check that stuff out. So it's cool. I thought that would be an interesting thing. So I'm cool. I'm glad that I mean, you obviously got a chance to get out and check all that stuff out. I haven't had a chance to yet, but it sounds like all of these things are pretty enjoyable for just about everyone involved, which is cool. There's not too much drama because that's the worst. And everybody's just mad.
And I think people are going to be mad,
forever.
I think people will be mad at it, and if they don't make any more and tie them together, people are going to be mad. But the problem is nobody, half the people watching these never read the comic books, and they never got in depth into these. And I'll admit, there's like for example, Ant-Man. Never read a comic book ever in my life of Ant-Man. Spider-Man. Yeah, I read a lot of Spider-Man comic books. I honestly didn't read many Captain American comic books because I saw it as like this. I felt it was this big corporate shill, which in reality I was wrong. They were not the corporate shills. That was Iron Man. But I mean,
yeah.
That's what I thought as a kid. I just hear America, and then I was pre-Trump thinking "Make America Great" with Captain America, but it really wasn't that.
Yeah, that was World War II stuff there, man.
Yep, and I just anyway. So a lot of people are going to be upset. There's a lot of people that don't think it's better than the first movie. I think it is better. I think the difference is
some people think that that Endgame isn't better or is better. That Infinity War is better than Endgame.
Yep.
Really?
Yep.
Wow.
I'm on the opposite spectrum only because they gave a conclusion. And again, the conclusion wasn't just this 5-minute blurb at the end of the movie. The conclusion was, like Tolkien did. It wasn't a full hour, but the conclusion was longer than you would have expected. And you're sitting there the whole time going, what's going to happen here? Oh, it's just over. Okay, time to leave.
Yeah.
I don't know. It is what it is. I do think that yes, this Marvel thing leaves a mark on a generation. It's been able to expose people to a lot of
how big it's been. It's just insane. It's just nerd culture taking over the entire culture.
Yeah. And for me, that's exciting because this is stuff I was into as a kid, and like, I'm excited for the last Star Wars movie. I'll be honest, I am.
I kind of am too. I'm not like going to go see it with anything else. I won't see it the day it comes out or something, but like, I did really enjoy the last one. I'd watch it a couple times because, it was kind of long and I was drinking some drinks. Yeah. And so the other movie was like, oh, I need to go rehash that ending real quick.
But, I'm excited. I'm excited for that too. And that's kind of the end of the new trilogy. Is it as epic as the original one? I don't know. Like my son thinks it is, right? My son thinks that it actually is. He enjoys it more almost than the original one, only because, you got to think that's his generation. He grew up when these came out. You and I did not grow up when the original Star Wars came out, but
no,
doesn't mean that we still can't be excited about it. And what's exciting for me is to see that Star Wars culture, right? To some extent, the inclusivity to some portion of it inside of this. Like, he's excited by this now, and it's just nice to see that, in your child, I guess.
Yeah, Disney said they're going to be taking a break from the Star Wars stuff after these 3 chunk movies minus the spin-offs with the Han Solo and the what was the one where they got the prince for the Death Star?
Rogue One,
yeah. I enjoyed that one too. It's like a standalone kind of thing. It was pretty cool. So like Disney said that they're going to be taking a break from like the main story arc, so there may be some other stuff, but like I think Disney's going to be doing some crazy restructuring with all the 21st Century Fox accumulations that they've been doing, because like they basically picked up a whole bunch of Marvel stuff and everything. I mean, there's a whole bunch of really wild things that are going to be happening in the near future on that too. That could be another reason why the main story arc of this giant Marvel thing is kind of coming to a close, because nobody really knows exactly what's going to be happening for a lot of really big franchises and intellectual properties. So it's going to be interesting to see what media does, because we're seeing a huge coagulation of like multimedia properties happen right now. And I mean, we're seeing capitalism once again kind of concentrate everything to a really small section of a few people who own almost everything. So media is shrinking even more. I don't know. This could tie in a little bit to some of the later stuff that we talk about in the episode here.
Exactly. Well, I think that's enough. We've had enough Game of Thrones, So the actual topic that we wanted to get into tonight was an opinion piece from the New York Times from back in March. And the discussion is, on paper, the election is the Democrats to lose, right? And we're talking about Trump's presidency, and there's a lot of people that are looking at all the Democratic candidates, and they're saying, are they going to matter? How is it going to play out in 2020? But an interesting conversation has kind of come up, right? You know, it's not just specifically a demographic of white or black or Hispanic people that are going to be able to help influence 2020. It's also what we would call a non-religious spectrum that we could be talking about, because there's more to it, folks, than, originally thought out. Is there a possibility, and I guess you can go first, Hannah, and give everybody your opinion, is there a possibility that non-believers could sway this election by uniting with Democrats to push through even a centrist to get rid of the Trump that we've had for the last 4 years?
Well, I mean, obviously, you and I both are probably going to be in the same category here, as believing that fundamentally the non-believer community is going to lean more progressive. We know that the majority of non-believers in this country are usually of higher education, and they're usually more progressive leaning as far as political beliefs. And so these two things tied together, this would not be a surprise. We do know that the non-believer community is becoming one of the larger communities. It's not so much that we're like a unified thing. So like one of the things that happened in the last couple of years, and things that people who kind of knew us from our old stuff, is that the whole idea of like an atheist revolution is kind of not really held to, because we have seen the difference in the diversity of the political beliefs for people who are non-believers in some cases. So like we know some of the more popular people who had really important podcasts, and still do, obviously, like the Thinking Atheist, Seth, his show, basically he has become, when people think in the Oklahoma perspective, it's like he is a very humanist and warm perspective when it comes to atheism and non-belief, but he's also a conservative, and he has a lot of ideas that, against the outrage brigade and stuff. So like there's some diversity there, but I really do think that on the whole, on the average, the non-believers themselves will swing more hard towards left of center, and then in some cases really hard left. But that number is massively growing. There's the most recent Pew research that pretty much said that the number of Catholics in this country is as low as it's ever been. We're talking, the richest religion in the country and in the world. And so like there's some really, really, really big things that are happening as far as the number of people that are leaving religion and how fast people who identify just as non-believers, and what they're doing is they're losing some of that identity, and that political identity is becoming their only identity. And I really think this is some of the reason of some of the, people like, way everything is way more ideological now, and because people are leaving what their previous connections were, what the previous identifications were under their religious connections, and now they have their only identity is essentially identity politics with their political beliefs. And so Republican, conservative, or the independents or whatever. I mean, any of those things, like that's becoming their majority identity. And so we have a much, much larger number of people who are considered non-believers and openly say they are. Their political systems may not change too much, but non-believers themselves becoming a large voting bloc and leading a little bit more towards the left could be a huge thing that I don't think a lot of people are really considering as a voting bloc that they should pander to. I mean, I know Joe Biden is not someone who I have ever heard mention non-believers. I remember hearing something from Kamala Harris talking about non-believers. Bernie Sanders had mentioned non-believers many times. His usually his opening act, Nina Turner, I believe is her name. She's the Ohio senator, I believe. She's talked. I actually shared it. We talked about it on a couple episodes ago. She mentioned non-believers and atheists in the same vein as believers, Christians, Hindus, Muslims, and everything. Like she said it at the beginning of the rally. And so like there's a growth in this. And so I really do think it could be a big swing. I don't know if it could be, something that CNN will statistically quote or 538 we'll see as a major deal, but I do think it's an it's the underbody of a decent sized iceberg, and I hope it makes a difference.
Yeah, and and the point is here is not to discuss like, oh my gosh, look, non-believers or the nuns are on a rise. Is that nice? Yes. Is it nice to see religion taking a backseat? Yeah, agreed. It is, but the real question is, it is.
Is it?
Yes, absolutely. I'm 100% for getting rid of religion. But,
yeah,
the difference is, though, is that if we want to talk into the political spectrum here, what has been one of the largest voting blocks? What is the one of the largest voting blocks inside of Trump's rhetoric? It's, or even conservative rhetoric. It's that conservative politician. So as long as the majority of the nuns are moving, at minimum centrist, we're going to be seeing the country shift slowly over time. And while I would encourage every one of them to become, very progressive, we all know that that's not going to happen. But even Seth Andrews himself, he didn't vote Trump. He did not vote Trump. He supported Hillary Clinton.
You really did? I figured he would be a Garrett Johnson guy.
Nope. And his thing is about the social side of things. If Bernie had gotten, would he have supported Bernie? We don't know. But I can tell you that the idea behind, if we start shaming every single person because they no longer want to vote in the spectrum, we're going to have a problem. And we also have a problem if we vote or shame people that only want to vote in the spectrum. And, so like the people that like vote blue no matter what, it's like, I agree with you to some extent. Let's talk about that. But the difference is if we're going to talk about it, we got to have a caveat put on there, because if we're going to put this caveat on here, we have to talk about the fact that if we do this now, what's the payback going to be in 20 years? And I think, the guy that we have on, we had a debate with, we didn't debate him, but we had somebody on the show that debated this guy named Dallas. And Dallas essentially says, I'm so sick of seeing everybody, proclaim the reason they're going to vote for Biden is because nobody wants Trump. And why don't you stand up for the candidate you want? Because the problem is if you get such a horrible conservative candidate, you have to go the other way no matter what to get rid of it. And then you can start rebuilding from there, because Trump is taking away social,
all the social safety nets.
Yep, safety nets. He's taking away those. He's also making minorities feel uncomfortable. He's doing all these things that are really bad for people without privilege. And the difference is even Bush didn't go to that far extent. Did Bush do some of that? Yes. Did Bush go to the extent Trump's going? Absolutely not. And while I would never vote for Bush in my whole life and never would again, and if new Bush came in, I still wouldn't vote for him, but the difference is, though, is he's still not as bad as Trump, and it's still a more reasonable conversation to have than when we put this person who doesn't understand politics, who is a horrible business person, into power over a, multi-billion-dollar, country. And
trillions
you're
dollars.
right, sorry.
Yeah, and so I mean, in the end, what we were definitely looking at here is like the whole concept of like the lesser of two evils, whatever. In some cases, the lesser of two evils is a progressive step. One of the things that I have an issue with is that a lot of people talk about like the voting base and the youth and the people and the general direction of this country moving left. Like when you talk about the people who are up and coming, they're going to be important people in the overall understanding and concept of morality in this country. It is moving left. It's moving left of center pretty consistently. We look at gay rights and we look at those kinds of things. But if you look at the political system, it's currently moving right fairly consistently.
And
so we're seeing a drive away from the voting base and an isolation of a very small group of people. It's a ruling from a minority, and these are things that are political strategic maneuvers that are changing the conversation as far as political in our country. And so like we definitely need to make the right decision. And it's like voting blue or whatever, the whole idea of like, would you vote for Biden in the primary? No. But if Biden was the guy against Trump, Yeah, because
Yeah.
there isn't a W. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like, that's
So-
a different thing.
You're right, and there's a guy, Rupert Jones, who is the CEO of the Public Religion Research Institute. And essentially what he says is, as the nuns are continuing growing in power, right, the Protestant or the religious sect is shrinking, and because the Protestant evangelicals and the majority of them are white, as well, they're losing their points. And because they saw this large shift during Obama's reign, they became more in tune with their political rights, and they felt disadvantaged, they started to reach out. Therefore, we got pushed to some extent into Trump. So between the people that were political purists and the political purists, as well as the people that are all of a sudden saying, "Hold on a second, I don't want to move this far. We were in power for this long. What happened? Let's rally and get more people out because we're going to use fear." That's why we saw the shift to Trump. And I don't honestly believe, in the next year that we're going to be able to shift it back. But the encouragement is the nuns are going to say, "Hey, hold on a second. Let's stop being complacent, because if we lose again in a year, right? If there's another loss, the nuns have to step up and say, well, I didn't vote for him. What happened? Oh, we were disengaged." We're going to have to become more engaged. We're going to have to become more saying, let's get rid of this conservative, white evangelical majority that is now actually not even a majority. And that's the exciting part about the nuns discussion, is that there's so much possibility here. And the data is showing that we can eliminate Trump if we get bigger, louder, demonstrate harder, and maybe compromise a little bit on a centrist politician.
Yeah,
Hopefully not Biden.
Hopefully. Definitely. One of the areas that I really am worried about here. So, there's a guy named Slavoj Zizek, and I believe that's how you say his last name. He's a Slovenian philosopher, and there are a couple of documentaries that involve him on Netflix, and he's an interesting fellow to be. This is a light term here. One of the things he talked about, he was happy. He was one of the philosophers that was happy to see Trump elected, and the reason he was happy to see Trump elected was because he thought that this would bring about a national uprising of progressive and left-leaning people seeing this right to center, right to right-wing nationalist uprising happening in their midst, and they would be so upset and so uproared by it that they would, they would make a huge change. And in 2018, what did we see? We saw the year of the woman, the most women that have ever been elected into a United States government in history. And the understanding of 2020 coming is that whether or not that will be an ultimatum on some of these philosophers who talked about things being a huge change or not, and whether or not the nuns will have a big piece of that is a big question, because I really do think that the majority of the people in this country are starting to wonder who the heck is voting for this, and who the heck is so mad at people trying to come into this country, and they want to do it legally, but they can't because they're being held at gunpoint or whatever at the border, and vice versa. The people that are already in this country being vilified again, like they were during the Irish and Italian coming into this country, and just being told that they're bringing disease and pestilence into the country, and the Jews as well. I mean, these are things that have happened throughout history, and so whether or not the nuns will be an important piece of the puzzle to try to fight some of this stuff, I really would love to see that. I don't think there's enough statistical analysis that includes people that would be willing to say yes or no to that will get a clear outlook in 2020. I just don't. I don't know if that exists.
I agree with you. So I think that kind of leads into the second part of the discussion I wanted to have around non-believers and the Democrats and different things like that. Is there was an article from the Holland Sentinel, and again, yes, this is local. I won't lie and say this is not a local article, and this is an opinion piece, but I think there was an interesting discussion around this, right? Because Holland is a pretty conservative area, right?
Pretty. That was
Yeah.
Ted Cruz country and the primaries
Exactly.
for 2016. Yeah.
And the discussion here, right, is there was an article that was written in April on the 20th, right, that talked about, you know...
That's the best. That's the best. You had to mention it. It's like, this was written the National Day of Marijuana. Okay, continue.
At 5 p.m. He probably wrote it beforehand, got high, and then posted it. I don't know. Anyway.
Oh, maybe.
Anyway. And one of the first 10 words is high. So, I mean, I don't know. All right. We're way off track here.
H-I or H-I-G-H?
H-I-G-H-L-Y.
Okay, well, good for him.
I hope so, because I highly suspect. Anyway. So, the discussion is let's talk about socialism, right? You know, is America moving towards socialism? Is these democratic socialists the same thing as communists and Marxists and all these other things? And you and I, you know, like, I claim to be, to some extent, like an anarchical socialist, right? You know, like, I'm pretty far left. And when you sit here and read this article, I'm probably the person that could be considered a socialist, whereas somebody like my wife is probably somebody that cannot. But the nice thing about this is the guy breaks down what socialism is versus what the Trump campaign or the conservative campaign is trying to paint everybody as this far left demographic. And reading through this and then posting about it, I had a friend of the show, Larry, who has been on my Facebook since Atheist Analysis days. And he goes, I like this article because of the fact that there's a difference between socialism, democratic socialism, and
definitely
liberal socialism. And this is where you and I have never had this conversation. And the reason I wanted to talk about this, I wanted you to read the article. I wanted you to read the difference between how he contributes to the two, because you've identified as a democratic socialist. But going back to some of the things you've said and what you do in your personal life, some of me wonders if you're truly not actually a democratic socialist when it comes to this ideology, and you're more of a liberal socialist when it comes to that ideology, right?
Yep, and this is a different... I find myself in between the two of them. So, anyways, as you were saying...
Yeah, and this gentleman named Larry, he goes into the fact that a lot of people are actually misattributing policies and the success to what people are calling democratic socialism, when in reality it's just it's actual liberal socialism, and we should stop trying to conflate the two, because that's what the right, the conservatives, the Trumpsters are actually latching onto. That's what they're gravitating towards, is that side of it. Because people are like, I'm a democratic socialist, and then you do the Wikipedia search and you're like, oh, hey, look, well, this agrees with that. And in reality, a lot of the people that support Bernie are not part of that actual socialist or Marxist or anti-capitalist fundamental. They're just pro a lot of necessity items being controlled by the government to remove the capitalistic element within them. And it's,
the big thing that you're running into, like the major difference that I've seen between the two, is essentially democratic socialism is the idea of complete and total elimination of the capitalistic market, and it's being replaced by social ownership of the means production, but also self-management on democratic self-management and democratic management of economic institutions. And so, like, this is what Wikipedia has down here, and I definitely agree with what they've got on that. Is essentially what you're doing is you're removing the competition end of things, but which we've seen the capitalistic ideals eventually concentrates wealth and power in the hands of a few. This is a natural progression of capitalism. And so the democratic socialists, they're essentially trying to give a democracy, the decision-making power to the people, and they're making the decision-making power to the people of socialist policies. So, like, people are sharing the idea of the means of production and the profits of that labor. And the idea of liberal socialism, what it's doing is essentially it's kind of taking capitalism and socialism. So when you hear the people that say, like, I like the idea of having a government option in healthcare. So like when you're hearing a lot of people talking about having not so much Medicare for all, or a full-on single payer system, is what the Democratic candidates that are saying that, like, I want to have a public option, so you could have the option to choose private healthcare, or you could choose the public option, and it's the government run and the government subsidized and whatever program. And so like the liberal socialism is more towards that end, where it's saying it's allowing capitalism to exist, but it's offering a government option that would be as close to, a bare bones budget and equality stress program. And that's probably the two biggest differences when it comes to it. It's like democratic socialism essentially is removing the entirety of a capitalist system and replacing it in the means of production, not, your luxury goods or anything like that, but like the basic necessities for life are going to be essentially democratically decided through the government and through the systems of bureaucratic, government control. And so like that is a big deal. I do find myself looking towards that more than liberal socialism. But if I'm looking for progress in this country, in the direction that the entire planet has been taking in this regressive this regressive and political environment that we find ourselves in, when we look at the European issues and Brexit and the rise of isolationists and nationalist governments all over the world, I could deal with liberal socialism. I could deal with a hybrid, but in my ideal world, I would be a democratic socialist.
So I'm going to hold you to, let's have this conversation at the end of this discussion in a minute, though. So I'm going to hold you to that because I still want to go back through it. So in the article, they talk about capitalism working, but it's not flawless, right? And here's some examples. We all know everybody wants affordable health insurance. The reality is many cannot. Everybody wants affordable college. The reality is many cannot. It would be great if everybody whose job was eliminated had the financial resources to be retrained for a new position. The reality is that never happens, or almost never happens. People want these problems addressed. They recognize our capitalistic system leaves behind a significant percentage of fellow Americans who are deprived of modern necessities. They want to rectify these problems. What should we call these concerned people? They're not socialists, for they don't want to change the capitalistic economic system. Rather, they want to plug the holes. So the article suggests we should call them social welfareists. And after talking with Larry, he says that's not really a good term. It's actually liberal socialists, right?
Yeah, I would agree that the welfare thing, like when you say welfare, you're going to immediately turn off a ton of people in that demographic, just because that term itself is almost accusatory or negative. I mean, straight up. If you said, would you call yourself a welfareist in Oklahoma at like a coal mine or near the Ozarks, I guarantee you they'd be like, no, never. I would burn my house down before I accepted that. Like that would be a major point of personal pride and ego. Yeah.
And so when we look at, again, the difference between liberal socialism and democratic socialism, like you said earlier, the difference is it's based on a mixed economy. It's based on worker-controlled enterprises coexisting with private enterprises, rejecting centralized models of socialism that could discourage competition and creativity. And we're going to exclude Biden here. And I want to pick on Elizabeth Warren for a second. Because in fairness, she's one of the candidates that I highly support. I feel Elizabeth Warren is not a democratic socialist. According to these definitions, she fits in.
She said she isn't. That's the thing.
She fits into that liberal socialism. And while Bernie, at the exact same time, claims to be a democratic socialist, I don't feel he is. I feel Bernie is maybe a left-sided liberal socialist. Bernie is not technically a socialist, and I know everybody wants to paint that picture.
I don't think he would get rid of complete and totally of capitalism as well. I mean, I do know that he supported the ideas of having a communist revolution in Cuba. I mean, he thought that was a great idea, and along with Christopher Hitchens, he actually went to Cuba and went to support that. So, like, I mean, the idea of the Marxist revolution, the idea of Marxism itself having a scientific way of determining what everything was going on as far as, you know, human social connections or whatever. That's what Marx's intentions were. We saw people do that. They tried to use Marx's ideas really poorly. Stalin and is a great example of that, where they turned it into a weaponized philosophy of dictatorial totalitarianism and authoritarianism. But I don't think that Bernie would go as far as the definition that you have proposed for democratic socialism, which is the removal of basically all capitalistic endeavors when it comes to it. I know for a fact that he completely totally supports removing all of the healthcare insurance agencies, but there's the hospitals, which are still somewhat capitalistic driven because they're not state controlled. And so, like, there's a bunch of areas in there where Bernie would not be a democratic socialist by these strict terms that you're mentioning.
Yes, because democratic socialism, even in itself, does not look to remove all capitalism. It looks at creating it's your in between state, really.
Yep.
Between a true socialistic government. And again, even democratic socialists in pure theory reject Stalinism, Marxism. They reject those because they're authoritarian based. And that's what, you know, you and I've had that conversation before on the show.
Yeah, we've talked about it multiple times.
That.
Yeah, we've talked about it. They're like what people call socialism is authoritarianism in disguise. The idea of socialism is where every single person has a democratic socialism, where every single person has a direct vote over the decisions and means of production throughout a country. So, like, anytime like a new drug is designed, everyone in the country essentially has a voice as to what the price of that pill should be. Should it be $300,000 a year for a cancer drug? No, but capitalism has the ability to make those decisions. So, like, those are the differences when it comes to it, and as far as my understanding of it.
Exactly. And one of the distinguishing factors, right, between what would be a Marxist socialism, right, and a democratic socialism is that what they do is they look for how to right the wrongs of capitalism by giving collective ownership back to the people. So the difference is that when you look at like a Marxist socialism, you have a select few that control these things. In a democratic socialism, they're saying, let's take that select few and broaden it out. And in our society, in fairness, in our society, it may not be as obtainable as it could be in a smaller community. And I've argued this before, that if we broke the United States up into smaller socialistic sects, every state was a small socialist nation, and we thrive for each other, we negotiate with each other, but if everybody was on that same bent, you could technically implement socialism in America without creating that Marxist lean on it. But
just look at Northern Europe. I mean, it's a great example of it. These are small, relatively homogenous, not heterogeneous, but homogenous societies where relatively everybody is kind of sort of the same. They're culturally similar, and they've seen influxes recently of different cultures that are making a huge issue and really changing the environment out there. But it's testing those systems. But in the United States, essentially, our existence is itself a heterogeneous system of states, because each state, I mean, we talk about different states being red, blue. I mean, just right on that alone, it's heterogeneous. Where there's a collection, but we're not all in the same boat. And then if you break up each state into the different cultures that happen, like think about the southern Louisiana culture versus like northern Louisiana when you're starting getting into the farm culture. I mean, those are completely different when you get from Cajun into farm culture. Like, that's a different world. And so, like, if you look at each state, like they break up even into smaller pieces there. So, like, the idea that you could find a homogenous community just in a state alone. That might even be too big in some of the United States. But overall, like, I do agree with you. Like, if you shrink that sector down so that you're dealing with a smaller and smaller portion, obviously in the West Coast and the East Coast, right on the water, you're going to easily be able to implement all of these things. And when you get to the Midwest, it's going to be much harder. You're going to have a much more homogenous society that's probably going to lean more towards the capitalistic endeavors until they realize that they don't have the benefits of having the West and the East Coast for bringing things in. And so they're going to want more centralized government to help them, with the basic means of production and all that kind of stuff. Like there's an interesting thing that could happen there, but in the end, having smaller sectors, I definitely agree with you that you could really make this country pop in a bunch of different socialist sectors or small communal groupings.
Yes. And where the difference between liberal socialism and democratic socialism is democratic socialism would be the majority of the property is held by the public through democratically elected government, including most major industries, utilities, transportation systems, limits on accumulation of private property, limits on social wealth, limits on extensive publicly financed assistance and pension programs. They also want to create social costs and provisions of services added to purely financial considerations as the measure of their efficiency. They also want to impose governmental regulation of the economy, whereas liberal socialists want the majority of the property to be held through a capitalistic endeavor that's regulated by a actual democratically elected government that thinks in socialistic terms. So the difference would be is we would elect people that want to actually hinder capitalism from running rampant, which the majority of people that voted for Hillary or Biden are not thinking that way. Hillary and Biden are so capitalistic oriented, they're not even in the liberal socialist camp. And that's where I challenge
Biden's first major the day after he announced his campaign, his first major financial fundraiser was, I think it was either an insurance corporate lobbyist or it was a Comcast corporate lobbyist. It was one of the two. Like, it's just like, without question, just immediately right out of the gate, like, we're looking at thousands of dollars per donor for the big. He said he raised $6.3 million in his first 24 hours, higher than Beto O'Rourke or higher than Bernie Sanders. But this average donation per person, they didn't mention that because it's way, way higher than both of those two. And so Beto O'Rourke, he's obviously, he's kind of fizzled out as far as someone that we would like on the national scale. He was great against Ted Cruz because, basically getting a conservative Democrat in is a different story when you're running a local election. When it comes to a national election, even though he's a likable dude and he's pretty interesting, his politics is just not clearly left enough for us. So like, we're looking at, the guys that can get the small donors, and Bernie Sanders he's the biggest draw for the small donors, and I don't think that Biden is going to be able to pull that off. So like, the idea that the liberal socialist and the person who would definitely love what Elizabeth Warren has with the regulatory end, like, I mean, she is the clear front runner when it comes to actual legislation proposed and intellectual conversation. I mean, she's been awesome. I mean, she always has been, but recently she's really been slamming it out of the park, even better than Bernie has. As far as the things proposed that are legitimate and potentially useful. And so like, Bernie really has the backing of a ton of people, but I don't think he is the Democratic Socialist that he proposes to be too much. I think I would support much more, and I believe a lot of millennials would also support much more towards the actual Democratic Socialist than liberal. But I do think that like the majority of people they're like, oh, I the Democratic Party, I think they would be comfortable with liberal socialist perspectives right now, like adding a hybrid, but always having a government option and an increased or a very strong regulatory thing. I think you and I would probably be much more comfortable on like an actual Democratic Socialist platform where we're looking at taking away the means of production from capitalistic endeavors, and on top of that, putting limits to the caps, to the total earnings that people can have. Like, I really, really like that.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, well, yeah. On my personal side, I think that if you're the guy that wants to make multi-billion dollars or multi-million dollars, whatever you want to call it, you're the guy that gets taxed to the point where they put you on the higher end of society.
90 to 100% after a million a year, 10 million a year. I don't care. We're just going to take everything else after that. That's fine.
And I'm okay with reducing, some of these weird intrinsic things, right? Because everybody wants to be able to own their own business. And no offense to you, Hannah, but to some extent, in my opinion, I'm okay with a lot of small businesses closing and consolidating that efforts into a more cooperative society where there's 7 or 8 people like you, let's say, in Grand Rapids that own your own business. You make small amounts of money. You become one co-op where you still make the same, but you're acting as a larger entity as that. But the difference is that you're paying your fair share of taxes and you're biting into, let's say, a larger, and I know Steelcase isn't a good, comparison to what you do. But
it allows me to compete against larger groups like China. So, like, let's say we collectivize all of the small businesses who do really great stuff, and it allows me to compete. If we collectivize all of our strength and powers and intellect and intelligence and machining ability to compete with the underfunded poor people who get essentially raped of their labor in places like China and India and Taiwan and Taipei and the places that do our massive manufacturing. Collectively, we can strengthen and help each other and make the manufacturing sector stronger. But when I'm forced to compete against the other little guy in the area, that hurts both of us.
Yes, and democratic socialism favors decentralizing large corporations, and allowing smaller entities to be what they need to be, while taking the large concentration of capital that's been invested in different industries and creating and allowing that to become state ownership to allow for a regulation. So we no longer have Charter or Comcast. We now have a state-run internet. And then we have little guys like Arctech, which is, pushing out a better service technically than Charter, allow them to actually benefit from the market to the point where they either eliminate the government one because they offer better services than the government one. Because I'm not going to, if let's say Charter and Comcast merged, or I guess they're Xfinity now. If the two of them merged as a cable company and became government owned, and then the small guys, Arctech, which is a local company that offers fiber services in my area, but won't run fiber lines down my street because it costs too much.
And there's other companies that I know, people that in Grand Rapids, Triton Internet, like those guys, I used to know them. They were just like doing business only stuff. Like there's a bunch of little guys who piggyback off the big dudes.
Exactly. And the difference becomes is if those little ones get a bigger share because they're allowed to become a collective and they're able to fight against the government one, and the government one goes, oh, you know what? These smaller companies are winning out, and the government one steps back. That's true democratic socialism. The difference becomes because that allows that capitalistic market to still infiltrate and create revolutionary ideas without completely, taking away that avenue. And then the difference is that the government one doesn't fight back by creating regulations to stifle the small businesses, which is liberal socialism, in my opinion. And that's the difference. Liberal socialism wants to fight back by doing those different things to allow either the government-funded thing or the larger corporations to succeed, because that's what capitalism is. Democratic socialism says, let's stop that, and let's allow the little guys to get as big as they want without taking over. And when they get too big, we're going to take them and slap on the wrist and either absorb them or we're going to fight against them. And that's what happens. And the difference is the government isn't looking to become this big entity that makes billions and billions and trillions of dollars. The government's saying is, we're here to serve you, to allow everything to play out the way it needs to allow new innovation to come from smaller corporations that can then feed into us. We absorb them as needed, and we allow new organizations that have a fresh model become potent or relevant. And capitalism does not do that, because in capitalism, you can have a new idea and it could take off, but once you become this big conglomerate, you can buy enough market share, you can buy enough ads, you can buy all these other things that allow you to maintain on the top. Again, we talked about how much we love Star Wars earlier, but in reality, when you look at it, it's become this large, multi-capitalistic organization that is somewhat ruining society.
Disney is scary. Disney is a scary, huge creation. So, like, but real quick, just for a small real world scenario. So, like, let's say that we become a full Democratic Socialist state. So Michigan becomes Democratic Socialist without question. All the means of production are instantaneously absorbed into Michigan. Michigan itself, all of the things that involved automated, basically autos, auto vehicles, all of the manufacturing that is essentially diesel trucking and all that stuff, that is instantaneously absorbed into the state, and the state itself absorbs all of these corporations. What happens then? So the total money of that industry is essentially distributed to all of the people that are going to be in that area. So I am a little guy. The only thing that can keep me from making more money and being more efficient and being better is if I had more money. If I had the resources and the access to a better machine or a couple of machines that could change what I do, I could do 3, 4, 5 times as much work as I do now. But the reason I can't do that much work is because I don't have access to the capital. I don't have the access to the newer machines. So let's say the Democratic Socialist ideal takes away the capitalistic infighting that we have between other competitors that are small like me, and all of those groups all have a collective bargain and a collective, purchase into a pot of however they would structure that money for investment every year. If I had a certain amount of investment guaranteed every year, the amount of tenfold, quadruple fold that increase in my production that I could do just if I had access to that stuff would be, without question. And so, like, that's the biggest thing is, like, I would be competing not against the little guy, the Evans Machinery, some of the smaller machine shops that I deal with and compete against. I wouldn't be competing with them anymore. I'd be competing against the guys in China, competing against the guys in Germany, the people who make stuff that I deal with now, that they send stuff to the United States. It's garbage, and then I fix because it's so bad. Or I can make it from scratch and make it better. And the United States could become a manufacturing capital. Like, this could be something that can happen. And so this is, to me personally, what I think would happen if you took the Democratic Socialist aspect and you basically essentially put that means of production into state control and you actually gave it to the people. So, like, the thing is, that could get all tied up in bureaucratic red tape. There could be 1,000 people who essentially stand around the water cooler and ask about TPS repulsion. That they could absorb all of that money. And that's a danger of this. But I really think that the means of production, and the people who know what's going on, they could do something that would be really, really beneficial to this country. And I would love to see that happen. I don't know if I'll ever see a small-scale experiment in the United States. I would love to see the manufacturing experiment maybe in some of the Scandinavian countries, because they've done such a good job with socializing healthcare and like paternal care, basically giving parents and children, time to be parents and children. I don't know specifically what they do as far as their support of manufacturing, but, like, I really would love to see a small scale experiment and then love to see that grown in the United States. I think we're too heterogeneous of a society to really have this, a compulsory thing that works across the entire thing, because we are really a diverse country. But I really think that Democratic Socialists and Socialism would be a big boost to my personal business if I was ever given access to something like that.
Exactly. I agree 100%. And, as we close the segment out, the Holland Sentinel, the guy said this: make certain they can define socialism correctly. Stop allowing them to mischaracterize what socialism is and what you represent. That's clear. That's clear to me.
I mean, that's really important. Semantics does matter. Some people get caught up in it, but it really does matter when you're talking about terms like this.
Yeah. And in this case, the majority of us are middle liberal socialists to democratic socialists. So I feel more comfortable. I would say the majority of the people that are donating to Bernie and Elizabeth and Andrew Yang, they're liberal, not democratic socialists. Yeah. I would agree with you there. Exactly. Well, as a final segment of the show rolls in, I wanted to spend a few minutes having this conversation because this is an environmental conversation. And we could talk about socialism and how we should be doing things. We could talk about waste and all these other things. And NPR had a great article about meal kits having a smaller carbon footprint than grocery stores based on studies. And I said, that's interesting.
So meal kits like Blue Apron or something?
Yeah, like Blue Apron or I don't know another one, actually, now that you mention that. The only one I've ever really heard of is Blue Apron. And it's only because my son, my ex-wife and her new husband, they bought into Blue Apron for like a year for the recipes, and then now they just take the recipes and they go to the grocery store and buy the food, for it. And
okay, so like the ones that I've heard, Sunbasket and HelloFresh, those are apparently two of the top. But I just found a quick list of 10. So Green Chef, Home Chef, Freshly, Every Plate, Gobble, and Diet to Go are other competitors to that. So like the whole the idea of this is essentially it's like you get onto a meal plan where you pick your meals or you pick you pick the produce that you want and you can make your own meals, whatever. But essentially it's like kind of like a Shipped, which is a company that deals with Meijer, where you pick the groceries that you want and they're delivered to you. Some of them deliver you, like they'll deliver you a box. All of the things need to go into the pot at a certain time and you get a meal on the output. It's like those are the ones that are like pre-planned meals. Some places have like produce and things that you want and you make what you want out of what they offer. So like there's a variety of things that people offer, but I do think that these things are pretty cool. And I think this is very interesting. The NPR talked about the carbon footprint of these because people think like, oh, you're driving cars around, you're delivering these things. You got to be burning fossil fuels. It's got to be terrible, right?
Yeah, and they also look at what you're putting in your garbage can, and people are like, holy crap, these one-time use plastics, which has been a huge thing. A huge thing, especially in California, man. Like one-time plastic straws, plastic bottles. And I don't disagree. Plastic bottles are one of the largest environmental hazards of our time. But they talk about that because these meal kits utilize a lot of plastic, one-time type plastics, right? But these studies that were published by the Resources Conservation and Recycling group examine the whole life cycle from farm to garbage can of these different meal kits. And they find that on average, store meals produce 33% more greenhouse gas emissions than the equivalents of Blue Apron. And I sat there and I go, okay, hold on a second. I'm going to pick on my parents for here.
Yeah.
It is, but I'm going to pick on my parents for a second here, right? When my mom was sick, we went over and cleaned out her fridge and her cupboards and got rid of like 4 garbage bags worth of food that you just wouldn't eat. And I sat there and thought, if you planned your meals out and you receive these kits, and you can, even with Blue Apron, you can actually say how many people are in your family, give me a meal size for this. And again, yes, it costs more, technically speaking, right? You can go to the grocery store and buy the same stuff and buy in bulk, and it's cheaper. But the difference is your carbon footprint is actually less, because if you need let's say you need a half a head of broccoli for 6 people for this meal, you are no longer buying a full head of broccoli because it costs 10 cents more than this half head of broccoli, which I'll admit I do all the time because
dude,
it's cheaper.
I have half a head of red cabbage in my refrigerator, and I cannot find the use for it.
Give it to me.
I can't.
I'll use it. I
just made a giant thing of coleslaw for my daughter's first birthday. We had a big birthday party at a petting zoo. It was great. It was awesome. I found an awesome recipe with
Did you put mayo
apple
in it?
cider vinegar, and we used Miracle Whip because some people were complaining. I know. Well, either way, we had a little bit of sugar, and it was a really nice, benign slight. But I got the red cabbage and the normal cabbage in there. The problem is that you only use a third red cabbage to like normal green cabbage. For the recipe, in some cases it's 6-1 normal cabbage to red cabbage, and so I've got a half a head of red cabbage that I got to find a use for. And you can use it in salads and stuff like that, but like in the end, I will probably throw away probably 30% of that cabbage. I really will. It's just a beast of a piece of produce. It didn't cost much, but there's a carbon footprint of tossing away such food. So most of the time, I use such foods in my compost pit to reuse them in my garden as natural fertilizer. And so like some people can do that to boost or reduce your carbon footprint if you're doing things along those lines. But like what is here, this particular investigation is basically looking at, it's like if you're taking the food, if you're not eating it, you just immediately toss it away, like what you talked about with your mom. So like those kinds of things, that has a big footprint. And then also you usually don't think about the carbon footprint of things sitting in the open in an open refrigeration unit in your grocery store. I mean, think about like lettuce in a refrigeration unit spraying water. Like how much energy and water does that use? And is that good for the environment? Or is it better just to have a head of lettuce shipped directly to you with a little bit of plastic on it?
Yeah.
Which has less.
Exactly.
And surprisingly, it's not that bad.
Exactly. This is where capitalism fails, right? It's cheaper because, again, a store, if we look at a true capitalistic environment, a store goes, if I don't have 150 heads of cabbage in the store, and only have 10 because that's actually all we sell, people are going to be like, I'm not coming here because I can't get my head of lettuce or my head of cabbage. So I'm going to go to Family Fare because they have 20 or 30, and I know I can always get one. And I won't lie and say I'm not the same way. Amazon,
so much more than Family Fare. Oh my God.
Exactly. And Amazon is the exact same way. For example, my son and I are into this Star Wars Destiny card/dice game, right? They had this weekend sale where they had this one booster set that's normally $80 on sale for $25. Well, if I went to my local store, they don't have it because it's a year old. And the guy's like, well, I don't carry it, but I can get it for you in 4 days. But I can order it from Amazon for a third of the cost, get it here. And guess what? Amazon doesn't hold that many of them. What they do is they require their suppliers to be able to supply it on demand that fast. And because we've focused on the immediate needs of society, we're creating so much extra waste. Yeah. And when we talk about if we could fix the high side of the capitalistic market where nothing that becomes rare is all of a sudden something you have to pay 17 times the price for. Again,
the basic markets of economy, where demand determine price. I mean,
yes. If you could fix that, you could reduce the amount of waste because of that is what actually forces a lot of wasteful entities, right? And again, we could take Apple. I'm going to pick on Apple. Apple has like 3 or 4 tiers of phones, right? That top tier is the highest costing one. And you know why it's the highest costing one? Because they don't make enough of them. They keep it regulated on purpose to charge more money because they're going to make up for the waste of that lower end one that they're going to overproduce because they're selling you, hey, come buy Apple. So somebody like you buys the crappiest cheap phone because you're like, I don't care what phone I have. And oh my God, I got a free phone because my wife got a phone. And the difference is you're just getting that phone. So they're catering to people like your family where your wife buys the most expensive one, you get the cheapest one, and you're both happy. And the difference is that waste on that cheap phone means nothing to them because they're making 17 times what they should make on the most expensive phone.
Yeah.
And
I can see where that would come in there because this I have the iPhone 10R and it was what is it? It's $450 cheaper than the 10S, I think it was my wife got, which is $1,200, I believe, the phone, and mine, the 10R, was $750. And not to nitpick, but the precision of the screen pinpointing where I am in a word or putting on buttons, my iPhone 7 or my Samsung 7, Galaxy S7 is more precise. Like, it is a cheap phone.
I 100% disagree with you.
My 10R it's not. It has not been.
I'm going to disagree with you because I don't think you. No, I have an iPhone 7 Plus, man. Yeah. Like, I'm old generation.
Like the phone that I've got right now, like when I with the way that the
you're
biased.
I'm sorry, you're biased.
Like, no, I
you
know.
have a bias lean here.
If you type the word Christopher Tanner in and you put one N in, you can't click near the N in the middle. It'll only take you to the beginning or the end of the word.
Disagree with you. It can do that. You just don't know how to do it, man.
Yeah.
You just don't.
So there may be a setting and adjustment or whatever, but either way, so my assumption is that the cheaper phone, it does make a difference into what you're doing on that. But like I really do think that, like, when it comes to the cheaper phones and the carbon footprint or whatever that Apple may be doing on that, like, they may really be short shifting a lot of the quality for just 1 or 2 degrees lesser and making a ton more money on those because they're really short shedding those. It could be the same thing with Samsung and any other manufacturer as well. It's like you're essentially trying to boost that one, lead component, and that's bringing you the most profit. But it really does surprise me that capitalism itself would be something that would support this incredibly wasteful perspective. But I don't think that people and capitalism think of the environment and waste as a quantitative measure of something that's like, it's a really big deal when it comes to our spending habits. So like we still, as an economy, think of waste and garbage as like, oh, this is just the thing that just goes away.
Exactly.
We didn't meet our levels.
Yeah, oh, wow. And they taught the studies, and that's what's exciting about these studies. And I'll be honest, this was an eye-opener for me, and it's actually made me want to go back and reevaluate these. The problem is if it's cheaper for me to go to the store and buy this and waste it, that's the sad thing. And that's where capitalism fails, is that these companies that are buying into this meal kit thing, if you could more plan out and be more prepared, you could reduce your carbon footprint. And if enough people bought into this, you could actually lower the cost of these meal plans, and you could actually eliminate these stores, which are highly wasteful. The difference is you remove that immediate satisfaction, which is what people are in it for,
or the choice. The choice. I don't know if you Planet Money talked about on a podcast. They talked about like the illusion of choice. One of the things that we look at is that they found that if you walk into a store and there's a display case, right, and let's say there's 37 barbecue sauces and they have 37 different cups, and you can pick whichever one you want to do and you want to taste them all. They found they actually had less interaction with people seeing 37 different sauces than they had a display case with just 6 different sauces. And they said that what they found is that the reason being, the psychological reason behind that, is that there's too many choices, that somebody wouldn't want to sit there for 5 minutes and taste every single sauce and make you pour a squirt in every cup and make sure that you have taste on it. And then the potentially of having like a disgusting barbecue sauce. And so what they saw was that the consumer, the average person, there's a low limit where they're like, there's only 2 choices. This is stupid. Or there's 30 choices. Why the hell would I ever do that? And they found that the ones that had 6 choices actually have found more engagement, more people were happy, more people left actually buying something. And so what they've seen is that in grocery stores where you have 37 different kinds of garlic salt, people will look up and they say, God, I need garlic salt. Which one do I buy? In cases where there's too much choice, they'll actually just not buy anything. I don't know which one. I don't want to make a bad purchase. Screw it. I'm just not going to buy it. And they found that the more people would just not buy the thing that they needed. And so like this is something that, Planet Money and economists have talked about, and these are actual things that happen as far as economics are concerned. And these grocery stores and the things that we see, a lot of people are talking about the end of the grocery store and the rise of the Amazon and the rise of these, personalized markets. Well, these could be a good thing if you're removing this ridiculous notion of choice that most people are actually they don't like, and they don't want to be anywhere near it, as far as like, and they'll actually drive them away from making economic purchases and decisions. Like these are important things that are the developments that are happening when it comes to like the market economy that we have now. And I love everyone likes to beat up on the giant Amazon, which is a dangerous thing when one company owns everything, but they are changing the way we buy stuff. And if you had 6 choices to click on, like, okay, we want to buy a barbecue sauce for your dinner, and Blue Apron has 6 sauces, or they have 30 sauces, are you going to click and read the description of all 30 sauces, or are you going to read through the 6 ones and pick that one? Which one seems like a better option to you?
You're not going to do either of those. You're going to Google what's the best Blue Apron barbecue sauce. That's what you're going to know. You're going to do that.
I don't think I would.
Then you're a dumbass. It's the same with your phone.
Like if you're only left with those 2 choices, though, it's like this is part of the economics and the science. Is that if you're only left with
2 versus 30, are you going to look at 2 versus 30? Yes, I'm not going to go through every 30 of them.
That's what they say. That when you look at the basic science of like what the people do, if you give them 6 choices, they usually walk away happier, and they'll actually purchase what they're expected to, or purchase one of those things. And so like those kinds of things are working their way into that Blue Apron stuff, where like there's a limited choice of things that you can purchase from. But that's actually not a bad thing. And in this case, it could actually reduce your carbon footprint. This could be a beneficial move for society. It's like these are things that we need to kind of understand and move on, as far as our old ways of making purchases and going to grocery stores and expecting to have 9,000 ideas of carrots.
Yes, and the idea is that back in the day, people stopped eating at restaurants all the time because they couldn't afford it, because it was cheaper to go to the store and make all this stuff. Because in the end, it is cheaper to go to the grocery store and buy what you need to make meals. And if you're conscious, it is, in fairness, if you're conscious, it is actually still cheaper. But if you look at the environmental impact of it, which most people don't consider, because the environmental impact does not have an effect on how much money I have in my pocket at the end of the day, ever, because it's a capitalistic system. That's why. Is until you can create the environmental impact from, or the social and financial impact from the environmental impact you have, you can't change society. So, in fairness, if it was better for society to be vegetarian or low meat vegetarian, until you can socially and financially impact people, you're not going to change it. If I can buy 100 pounds of hamburger meat for what I spend on 10 pounds of fake,
organic
impossible organic meat, and I don't even want to say organic, but just fake, environmentally friendly meat, you're not going to buy that 10 if you're in that lower bracket. So the only way to fix our actual environmental footprint is to fix the financial impact that we all have, and to level out closer these social groups that we all fit into financially, to the point where if you make $10 an hour, it's similar to making $30 an hour. And if you make $100 an hour, you're so elite that to some extent you're taxed to the point where you're only making $40 an hour, right? And you fix all these things, because then you can turn around and then you can look at the environmental impact of what you're eating. But if you can't fix the financial aspect, nobody cares about the environmental aspect, because again, according to Maslow's pyramid, I have to survive first, and then second, I can look at long-term survival. if I can live one more day, I'm not going to care about 10 more days because I have to survive this first day. If you solidify your one day, then that 10 days is the next thing you focus on. And if you can solidify that, the next thing you look at is the 100 day. And then, next thing you know, you're looking at years and years and years, and it compounds. And that's the problem. Nobody looks at it like that. And until you solve that base level, you can't solve any other levels. You just can't.
It's one of the things that, like, Michael Pollan has been a guy that I've read recently. We talked about him with the psychedelic stuff, is that he has a book in defense of food. And at the very beginning of the book, I'm paraphrasing here, he says we should all eat food, mostly plants, a little bit of meat, and what is it? The last part was like, and lots of leaves. And essentially what he's saying is that we should eat food. And when he says we should eat food, he's saying that you should essentially anything that doesn't have a label. So anything that's grown out of the dirt is a good thing to eat. And then mostly plants, you should eat mostly plants. It's very conclusive that if you eat mostly plants, your overall health is increased. And some meat, because protein and products and some of those things, they're actually good. Eggs and stuff like that have not been shown to be incredibly, horribly dangerous. And then lots of leaves is a really big deal. Like that, at the very beginning of the book, he says, "I'm giving away the entire thing here." And it's like, it's an awesome perspective on this. And so, like, these prepackaged food things, what you're looking at when it comes to some of this stuff is you're looking at some, they're still industrialized. You still have some danger there, but you're going to be getting fresh foods, fresh grown foods, and you're not going to be getting prepackaged stuff with labels on it. And there's a potentiality where you're going to be reducing carbon footprint. You're going to be increasing the quality of the food you eat. But also, part of that carbon footprint is how unhealthy you are.
Exactly.
I mean, if it's healthier, awesome. Let's test it out and see what happens.
Exactly. I agree. Oh, well, this has been a very vibrant episode.
Yeah, it's been long. We've been fucking bouncing around for a while here.
Yeah. So as we close the show out, we got to have our quick saves of the week. And if you don't know what the quick save segment is, you should go back, I don't know, like 40 episodes, because we've been doing this for a while. We've been doing this for almost a year. And I like this segment because there's always an article I save that I'm like, this is technically not podcast worthy. This is not worth a full segment, but it's worth having a conversation about it because I find this interesting. So given the fact that we've legalized weed in Michigan and 50% of the nation at minimum have been smoking weed for over 100 years, if not longer,
Damn.
There is this new study that came out. And again, this is just a minimal study that talks about marijuana users gain less weight than non-marijuana users. And if you've ever smoked pot or known anybody that smokes pot, you go, that doesn't seem right. Because when you get high, everything tastes better. If you have good weed, at least. If you have shit weed, I'm sure it doesn't. But if you have good weed,
you're
everything tastes better. You get what's called the munchies, right? And it's funny, it's a very short article. It's a very, reasonable study. They talk about how MSU has researchers, which I would love to be a part of, that talks about your munchies essentially don't lead to serious weight gain. And I don't know, because I've always fluctuated 5 to 10 pounds, and when I lost weight, I haven't changed my lifestyle other than I stopped working out and I stopped having to walk the floor. But my munchie habits haven't really changed, right? And so they talk about this, and, if your munchie habits are, I eat a whole pizza every night, yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah, or if you smoke a joint and then you smoke an entire Little Caesars pizza, you're gonna gain some weight.
You are, but it shows, the studies show that people who regularly use marijuana are not eating a Little Caesars pizza every night. You don't get high and go, I have to have this.
Binge.
Yeah, you do get munchies. But a lot of times, people are too lazy to go anywhere. Like, what do I have in my house? And how we just had a segment where we talked about how people don't really plan their meal plans out. So these people are like, I'm going to get high every night this week. Therefore, I'm going to buy this munchie, this munchie, this munchie, and this munchie. Because I'll be honest with you, in my world, if I did that, and I'm not going to say I've ever done that or not done that.
Yes, you have. Yes, you have.
But usually they only last 1 or 2 days. For example, prosciutto is my favorite stone munchie food over everything else. It's like the best thing in the world. And it's
you like cured ham products as your munchie.
It's
That's
like
awesome.
It's like premium salty raw bacon, and it is insane.
that is a sincere, like that is like ultra upper class.
It is
stuff right there.
You want to know how often I buy it? Once every like 6 months. Usually I get it, and then my wife, who doesn't smoke, she'll be like, "You bought prosciutto? You know I want some of that. You know that tastes good." I'm like, "Yeah, that's for when I get high." And she's like, "You know you're going to share that, right?" I'm not going to get high. I just want that. It tastes good. You know it tastes good sober. Yeah, I get it. But
the only time I buy prosciutto is when I make my own pizza. Like we don't put ham on pizza.
Good idea.
That's a good idea on homemade pizza. But that's good stuff though.
But you know what I put on homemade? So every once in a while I'll buy like a French bread loaf, right? And I'll make French bread pizza, but instead I'll put like an olive oil dressing on it, and then I'll make like a cheese bread, but I'll put olives and onions and mushrooms, and then I won't put any meat. I'll be like, I'm going to be 100% meatless with this to reduce my fat content and my salt content. And then I put cheese, and then I bake it, and then I pull it out, and I put like a butter, salt, and garlic sauce over top of it, like pepinos or vitellis do. And it's the best thing in the world. And I will have no meat on it. But now that you mentioned the prosciutto on it, like, that sounds amazing. And it sounds like I can take this concoction to the next level. But again, we go back to the article, and we don't have to spend a lot of time on this. But again, the ideology is if I buy a bunch of snack foods and try and plan it out, typically within 1 to 2 days, they're all gone. And then I'm back to, I have nothing else. And then you feel guilty. And then you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I just consumed 1,500 calories, and stuff. But the prosciutto is low calorie, low fat, high in sodium, in fairness, but it's low fat, low calorie, low carb. You can eat a whole packet for $10, and it's like the most amazing thing you've ever had. But I would not spend $150 on this for a week of getting high and eating it. I just wouldn't do that. Like that's stupid as shit. Like that's a waste of my money. I would never ever spend that. But chips and salsa, that's a different method.
You get yourself some, some good munchies are going on, but that's pretty high quality stuff that you're gonna want to deal with. My personal quick save on this one is this is kind of a tug on the heartstrings. So like, there's a puppy who was found in a house that was burning down. The firefighters found him. He was burned. He was burned pretty badly. He has a bunch of burnt spots on his back and everything. He spent a whole lot of time in that firefighter's unit, and he became a firefighter. He was he's obviously a dog / person who helps find people in fires. They're in a fire, and a dog with their unbelievable nasal senses have been trained to essentially help firefighters find something that's really important. And this is a great case. I personally, if you look at the picture we've included, this is a dog that looks like a pit bull. Full grown, this is a meaty, powerful creature that if it wanted to could just rip an arm apart or whatever it could grab. But this is, it really could. Like my two dogs are both pit mixes, something like this. And they can be dangerous if you come up to them and slap their faces like any other creature. If you came up to me and slapped my face, if a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old hit me when I wasn't looking, I would probably have a pretty adverse reaction to it if I didn't know what the heck it was. Like, these are animals. These are creatures. And so, like, people don't they don't think about this. And so I recently actually had a bunch of kids at the park when we took the whole family to the park, and kids were just grabbing at my dog's faces, and I really had to be conscious. Hitch, my big mutt, he jumped towards a couple of kids, and not like an aggressive manner, but like to the point where it's like, we got to go somewhere else because the dogs are getting anxious. And like, this dog here is a pit mix or a pit bull full on, and he is a firefighter. He has a little badge on his harness, and he is probably a more helpful person in a fire than most people would be in any society anywhere in this country. That dog saves lives and helps people, and he is part of a breed that considers that people consider to be completely unhelpful and dangerous and useless to society. The picture here is a wonderful thing, and this dog is, he's an inspiration, and he's awesome. So like, I wanted to have something, a happy moment on that, because he looks like a little bit freaked out by getting his picture, but we all know that a firefighter dog is a pretty sweet thing.
Yeah, and I think the idea here is this is humanity at its best, right? Somebody saved a dog, they rescued it, they brought it into their homes, and it's now helping society in a different way. And I think for me, the story here is it's the point where we can become humans and we can see somebody, we can save them, we can help them, and they can help better society in a different way. And I think this is my soapbox to some extent, right? But this is where I have a hard time with capitalism, because capitalism doesn't breed this. This is socialism to some extent. This is humanitarian socialism, because these people took a dog that, if we looked at, had nothing better to do in society. They had no idea this dog could help them. They had no idea how this would impact life. They had no idea of any of these things. And yet they saw this suffering little being, saved it, rescued it, and it showed gratefulness for what it was doing. And it brings it home a little bit, because every dog that I've had, we've adopted, every one of them. We don't have a purebred by choice. My border collie right now is probably a purebred, but she's not one we chose. We rescued her because people abandoned her. They abused her. Our German Shepherd / Mastiff, I guess, puppy, right? Same thing, was abandoned. And it's the sweetest thing. And as much trouble as it is to potty train this damn thing, it's the cutest little thing. And like, my one daughter loves it because it emulates her. It follows her around. It makes her feel more of a person, because this thing values the fact that you saved it from certain death. And maybe it's an evolutionary, trident for where we're at in society. Maybe it's an evolutionary bug. I don't know. But all I can say is, when we look at different things and we look at how life works, them saving this dog and for it to give back to society, it's just amazing. And if we look at true humanitarian socialism, and we understand where it goes and where it can go, we can start creating these things with people. If we look at people and value them as individuals and stop looking at them as a number or as a drain of society, they can create wonderful, amazing things. They can help contribute to our lives, to the lives of millions. And we just don't know it. And that's the thing here. We talked about our environmental footprint, right? And how we're ruining it. But if we look at humans and say, okay, let's stop looking at you as just a number and actually embrace you as an individual, as where you're at, how you are, what you can do, we can see potential go through the roof. And instead of having to restrict capitalism to some extreme extent, if we start embracing and helping make people on the lower end more successful, we'll start seeing more amazing stories like this, which will in turn create a better society without having a completely government restricted area. Thank you so much for joining us for another Cellar Door Skeptics. We'll be back next week with an amazing episode. We're going to be talking about our speech that we did over a year ago on secular parenting. Thank you so much for joining us at Cellar Door Skeptics. We'll be back next week with another amazing episode. Thank you, and have an amazing night.
You've been listening to a presentation of Cellar Door Skeptics. Check us out on Spreaker. CellarDoorSkeptics.com.
If you'd like to join the ranks of Patreons and sponsor the show, head over to patreon.com/Cellar Door Skeptics. For less than a 20-ounce soda or an energy drink each week, you can help sponsor us, the hosts, and our charity of choice. Patreon helps Cellar Door Skeptics create better content, become better activists, and it's going to help you stay healthier by drinking one less soda or one less energy drink each week. Click the link in the notes of the show to sponsor us today because we bring the discussion with the sources.